If you pick up any standard medical textbook today, or, even if you just look at how our society talks about the whole human life cycle, there is this underlying assumption.
Right, like a natural order to things.
Exactly, this unbreakable biological order. It dictates that you are born, you grow, your cells replicate, and then eventually, that replication degrades. You age, and the body just stops.
Yeah, the machine just winds down.
Right, and society, science, philosophy, even our most beautiful poetry, honestly, they all tend to point to that endpoint and offer the same comforting conclusion. They say, well, that is just the circle of life.
It's framed as a biological necessity.
Yeah, it gets categorized as clean, expected, and fundamentally neutral. It's just another normal phase of creaturely existence.
Right. The prevailing cultural narrative is that mortality is just, baked into the very fabric of the universe. To be a creature is to be finite, and part of being finite is eventually expiring. We treat it as the closing of a curtain that was, well, always meant to close.
But then you step into the world of biblical theology, specifically looking at the sweeping narratives from Genesis to Revelation, and that neat, comforting biological endpoint is completely shattered.
Oh, totally. The paradigm completely flips.
It really does. When you look at the source material we are diving into today, we are looking at a landscape where death is absolutely not a friend. It's not natural.
No, not at all.
It is, to put it bluntly, an intruder.
It is the absolute definition of a cosmic rupture. That's the phrase used.
Right.
The extensive theological analysis we're looking at today, authored by Chris R. Velasquez, really reframes this entire human experience of mortality.
And there are charts included too, right?
Yeah, these incredible accompanying charts. And the foundational premise across all this material is that death is a terror. It is a curse. It's an enemy.
And the stakes of understanding this are just incredibly high for us today.
They are, because if you misunderstand death-like, if you just write it off as a small biological adjustment or a natural transition, then everything else in the biblical story gets blurred.
Yeah, it all falls apart.
Exactly. Sin becomes trivial. Grace becomes, purely sentimental. The cross just becomes a therapeutic symbol of solidarity.
Right, rather than a rescue mission.
Yes. And the concept of bodily resurrection becomes completely optional.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are jumping into this massive, incredibly detailed theological text, and those charts titled, Death Enters the World.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is, but our goal is to explore this profound, overarching narrative. Because, we have to ask the question for you listening right now, what if the medical textbooks only describe the symptoms, but completely misunderstand the actual disease?
Right. What if death is literally an invader?
Exactly. We want to uncover how understanding mortality in this radically different way fundamentally changes how you view your own life, how you view grace, and how you view the future.
But to do that, we really have to start by defining the enemy. And this is where we run into our first major paradigm shift in the text.
Okay, lay it on us.
So Velasquez uses this specific phrase, cosmic rupture. The argument is that death is not merely the cessation of a heartbeat.
Right.
To speak of death biblically is to speak of a multidimensional catastrophe.
Okay, let's unpack this because I definitely have to push back right out of the gate here.
Go for it.
When the author calls death a cosmic rupture and an intruder, how does that actually square with basic biology?
What do you mean?
Well, if cells in our bodies don't die, like if apoptosis doesn't happen, we literally get cancer.
Right, cellular death.
Yeah. Biologically speaking, cellular death is actually required for a biological organism to live and grow.
Yeah.
So how can the author claim that death wasn't woven into the original fabric of the universe?
That is exactly the tension we need to address first. It's vital to distinguish between the natural transition of organic matter, like leaves falling from a tree or that cellular turnover you mentioned, and human mortality.
Okay, so it's a category difference.
Exactly. The theological claim being made here isn't necessarily that a blade of grass never withered in the Garden of Eden. The claim is focused squarely on humanity, bearing the image of God. For humanity, death is categorized as a relational rupture on every conceivable level.
So the text breaks human death down into a couple of dimensions, right?
Yeah, two primary dimensions. First, you have physical death, and this is the separation of the body and the soul.
The severing of the physical hardware from the immaterial software, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. And the biblical argument is that humans were designed as psychosomatic unities.
Meeting body and soul together.
Right. We aren't meant to be ghosts driving meat suits. The body and the soul are meant to be integrated forever.
So when physical death tears them apart, it's not a release.
No, it is an unnatural, violent tearing of the human ontology. It's a trauma. But crucially, before you even get to physical death, you have the second dimension.
Which is spiritual death.
Exactly, spiritual death.
And the text defines this spiritual death as the separation of humanity from God, who's the source of life.
Right.
And what's fascinating and frankly kind of terrifying about this framework is the assertion that spiritual death exists in the unbeliever right now.
Yes, it's present tense.
It's not something waiting at the end of a lifespan. It's a present tense reality. If we look at the charts provided with the text, it visually separates these two concepts really well.
It does. Physical death is literally the flat line of the body on an EKG in the chart.
Right. But spiritual death is a severed connection to the power source itself.
And that severed connection, it causes a cascading failure across the entire system. When the connection to the creator is ruptured, everything downstream breaks.
It's like a domino effect.
Totally. It separates humans from one another. It separates humanity from the created order, turning the environment from a garden into a hostile wilderness.
Wow.
And it even separates a person from themselves.
You know, I think the most helpful way I've found to conceptualize this is to think of death not as the final chapter of a book, but as a malicious virus that corrupted the original manuscript.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it wasn't written to the base code, right? He'd infected it.
Right.
And once it's in the operating system, it changes the way the entire program runs.
The virus analogy holds up incredibly well here because it gets at the mechanism of what actually happened. The author makes a vital theological assertion here, which is that after the fall, death operates in two specific ways.
Okay.
It is penal and it is ontological.
Let's slow down on those terms for a second, because those are heavy words. Let's start with penal, meaning like a penalty. It's a judicial consequence.
Yes, exactly. It is the judicial sentence pronounced against rebellion.
Right.
The text cites Romans 6.23 here. The wages of sin is death. The argument is that before sin, humanity was dependent on God, but was not doomed to die.
So they weren't naturally immortal either.
Right. The potential for immortality was there, but it was contingent on obedience. After sin, death becomes the penalty. It's the consequence handed down by a holy judge.
But the author doesn't stop at it just being a penalty. Like, it's not just paying a cosmic parking ticket.
No, not at all.
You mentioned it's also ontological, meaning it alters the very state of being.
This is where your virus analogy really shines. It's not just that humanity broke a rule and God imposed a fine called death.
Right.
The act of rebellion fundamentally changed the reality of human existence. The very nature of human life became death-bound. The code was rewritten.
So we didn't just receive a death sentence.
Exactly. We became dying creatures by nature.
Man, that's heavy. So if death is this virus that infected the manuscript and it completely altered our ontology, our fundamental state of being, what did that original uncorrupted manuscript actually look like?
We have to go way back to see that.
Right, because to really grasp the tragedy of a rupture, you have to contrast it with the pristine condition that preceded it.
And to establish that baseline, the source text doesn't actually start with Adam and Eve in the garden.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, it starts in eternity past, with the nature of God himself.
Okay, setting the ultimate baseline.
Exactly. Before there is a universe, before there is space or time, there is the living God. The text cites Exodus 3.14, where God identifies himself as, I am W who I am.
Right, the burning bush moment.
Yes. And the core premise here is that God does not just possess life, God is life.
He is life itself.
Right. He doesn't participate in a cycle of birth, growth, and decay. Death is absolutely alien to the divine nature.
Which really highlights a crucial distinction the author makes. Life, for a human being, is not an autonomous possession.
No, it's derived.
Right. And we tend to think of our lives like a battery. Like we come pre-charged at birth and we just run around doing our thing until the battery depletes and we eventually die.
That's the modern assumption, yeah.
But this theology argues that life is a derived reality. It's not a battery. It's an appliance plugged into a wall.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
We only operate as long as the current from the source is actively flowing into us.
Precisely. Human beings only live because God actively breathes and sustains life in them moment by moment. So if humanity severs itself from God, it doesn't just become, morally flawed or ethically compromised.
It cuts the cord.
Exactly. It cuts the cord. It becomes, by definition, severed from life itself.
Which brings us to the actual blueprint of creation.
Yeah.
Genesis 1 presents the original design as very good.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity is made for communion, for fruitfulness, and for unhindered life in God's presence. And the text spends a lot of time on the Garden of Eden here.
It does.
It pushes back on that Sunday school idea that Eden was just like a nice botanical park where Adam and Eve took long walks.
Right, with friendly lions and tigers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The author frames it more like an ancient temple, a sanctuary where the physical world and the divine presence perfectly overlapped.
And the centerpiece of that sanctuary is the tree of life.
Right.
The text describes the tree of life as a sacramental sign of God's sustaining life. It was a visible, physical guarantee of divine generosity.
So they had to actually eat from it.
Yes. In Eden, life wasn't precarious. As long as they partook of the tree of life, their derived immortality was totally secure.
Wow.
But even in this environment of absolute delight and abundance, a boundary is established.
The prohibition. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
That's the one.
God tells them they can eat of any tree in the garden, but not that one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, modern readers often look at this and think it seems incredibly arbitrary.
Oh, definitely.
Like, why put a poison apple in the middle of a perfect garden? Was God just setting a trap to see if they would fail?
The author insists this prohibition wasn't arbitrary at all. It established the fundamental moral and epistemological order of the universe.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Basically, it was the mechanism by which humanity acknowledged their creatureliness.
Their creatureliness, meaning acknowledging that they are the created, not the creator.
Exactly. Life with God requires trust, and it requires submitting to God's definition of reality. The boundary line wasn't just about a piece of fruit. It was about who gets to define what is good and what is evil. The rule was clear. In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die.
Right, a direct consequence.
And this proves that death wasn't built into the biological fabric of humanity. It was explicitly and exclusively attached to disobedience.
So it wasn't a natural endpoint.
No. To transgress that command is a fundamental rejection of dependence. It is humanity declaring, we want the gift of life, but we want to be independent from the giver of life.
Wow. Which sets the stage for the fatal glitch. The fall. Genesis chapter 3.
There we go.
The serpent enters the narrative, and the strategy employed here is just brilliant and terrifying. The text points out that the serpent doesn't start by saying, hey, this fruit tastes amazing, you should totally try it.
Yeah, right. It's much more subtle.
It is.
No.
The serpent attacks the epistemology. The serpent attacks the definition of reality. The exact quote is, you will not surely die.
It is literally the first theological lie in Scripture.
I really want to pause on that because it's so profound. The first lie isn't about human relations. It's a direct contradiction of God's word regarding death.
Exactly.
It promises autonomy without consequence. It offers knowledge without submission, wisdom without worship, and freedom without obedience.
It's the ultimate false advertising campaign.
It really is. And the human response to that false advertising results in the catastrophe we live in today. Humanity eats the fruit. And what happens?
Well, they don't suddenly step into this godlike, enlightened freedom.
No, not at all.
The text outlines the immediate, multidimensional nature of this sin. They instantly experience guilt, corruption, bondage, and alienation.
Instantly.
Yes, they realize they are naked, they feel shame, and their first instinct is to hide from the very source of life. Fear enters the human experience. Blame enters human relationships.
Okay, I have to stop you here and force us to look at the actual text of Genesis, because there is a massive apparent contradiction that the author has to resolve here.
Okay, which one?
The explicit rule given in Genesis 2 was, in the day you eat of it, you will surely die. It's a definitive time-stamped consequence.
Right.
But Adam and Eve take the bite, and they don't drop dead. They don't have heart attacks. In fact, if you read the genealogies, they live for centuries after this event.
They do.
So, did God exaggerate? Was it just a scare tactic? Or was the serpent actually telling the truth about the physical reality?
It is a critical contradiction to resolve, right? It hinges entirely on how we define death.
Okay.
If you define death purely as the cessation of biological function, then yes, it looks like God exaggerated and the serpent told the truth.
Right. On the surface.
But the author argues for a completely different sequence. The core principle here is that spiritual death precedes physical death.
The severance happens before the flatline.
Exactly. The moment they ate, the rupture occurred. They were immediately alienated. They hid in shame. They were cut off from fellowship.
So they did die that day.
Yes. On a spiritual level, they died that very day. They became biologically alive, but spiritually dead to the source of life.
That's like a flower that has been cut from its stem. The petals might still look vibrant and colorful for a few days, but the reality is the flower is already dead because it has been severed from the root.
That's it. That's a perfect image. Physical death returning to the dust was announced later in Genesis 3 as the inevitable lag indicator of the spiritual death that had already occurred.
Wow, a lag indicator.
Yeah, the virus was in the system, and it was only a matter of time before the hardware failed.
This brings us to a fascinating, almost paradoxical detail the text brings up about the immediate aftermath of the fall.
About the garden.
Yeah. God kicks them out of the garden, and he bars the way back to the tree of life. He places cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way.
Right.
Now, when I heard this story growing up, it was always framed as an act of pure wrath. Like, God is angry, he's locking the gates, and the flaming sword is this terrifying symbol of rejection, like get out and stay out.
That's the common reading, yeah.
But the author reframes this completely.
It is honestly one of the most profound paradigm shifts in the entire analysis. The text calls the barring of the tree of life a solemn act of mercy disguised as judgment.
I mean, how can a flaming sword keeping you away from life be mercy?
Think about the ontological shift we just discussed. Humanity is now corrupted by the virus of sin. They are spiritually dead, infected with guilt, shame, and a propensity for evil.
Right, the code is rewritten.
Exactly. So if God had left the tree of life accessible, humanity would have eaten from it and sustained their biological lives forever in a fallen, corrupted state.
Oh, wow. So they would have been locked into an eternity of brokenness.
Exactly. It would mean eternal depression, endless anxiety, perpetual war, and infinite decay with absolutely no release.
It sounds like hell.
It essentially would be. By barring the tree of life, God introduces physical death as a boundary line. It limits the reach and duration of human corruption.
The flaming sword is a firewall.
It is a firewall. God will not permit endless, sinful life. In a deeply tragic way, mortality becomes a mechanism to prevent hell on earth from becoming eternal.
That is just a staggering way to look at it. The flaming sword isn't just keeping them out. It's keeping eternal suffering at bay.
Right.
It's a desperate rescue mission to ensure that humanity's fallen state isn't permanent.
Right.
But man, it leaves us in a devastating position. Humanity is now exiled. We are dying physically, we are dead spiritually, and the infection is spreading through every subsequent generation.
The virus is out of the lab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how does the Creator interact with a creation that is now fundamentally hostile and death-bound?
This is where we move into the long shadow of the Old Testament. We have to trace how God manages and mitigates this reality of death through the historical covenants.
Okay, sort of setting the stage for a permanent cure.
Exactly. We start to see God repeatedly entering into a world that is defined by mortality and decay.
The text points to the story of Noah first.
Right.
After the flood, God makes a covenant to preserve creation. It shows that the spreading virus of human violence and death is under divine scrutiny. But God is committed to preserving a remnant. He isn't abandoning the project.
And we see it even more intimately with Abraham.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the context of Abraham and Sarah. God comes to a couple defined by barrenness. Their family line is effectively dead. They were overshadowed by the impossibility of generating life.
Right.
And into that death-shadowed situation, God promises offspring, land, and blessing. He introduces the promise of life where biologically there should only be an end.
Then the narrative jumps forward to Sinai, the giving of the law to the nation of Israel. The author points out that the covenant treaties of the ancient Near East were incredibly stark, and God uses that format to communicate with Israel.
Very direct language.
Yeah, in Deuteronomy 30, the terms are laid out so plainly. Obedience to the covenant is tied to life and good, and disobedience is tied to curse and death.
Right.
It takes what was implicit in the Garden of Eden and makes it an explicit national constitution. Life is tethered to adherence to God's word.
But the reality is the Israelites are already infected with the virus of sin. They cannot perfectly adhere to the covenant.
No, they fail constantly.
And this is where we really have to examine the mechanism of the sacrificial system. The text highlights Leviticus 17.10.
For the life of the flesh is in the blood.
Exactly. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life.
I really want to drill down into the mechanism here. To a modern listener, slaughtering animals on an altar sounds archaic. It sounds primitive and bloody.
It does.
Why blood? Why does the author argue this is so central? How does an animal dying transfer the guilt of a human being?
To understand this, we have to grasp the psychological and legal weight of substitutionary atonement.
Substitutionary atonement, okay.
Remember, the penalty for sin is death, the severing of life. The sacrificial system was a visceral, sensory dramatization of that reality.
Visceral is the right word.
It taught the Israelites that sin is not just a minor infraction that God can brush under the rug with a polite apology. The virus of sin is fatal. Its cost is life itself.
So it was an alarm system.
Exactly. Imagine living in the camp of Israel. The tabernacle is right there in the center. Every day you hear the sounds of animals. You smell the smoke of the altar. You see the blood.
You can't ignore it.
You can't. It was a constant, unavoidable reminder that death is the righteous requirement for rebellion. But it also introduced the mechanism of grace,
Yes.
that God accepts a substitute. The animal's life, represented by its blood, is poured out in place of the worshiper's life. The penalty is paid, but by a proxy.
It's a holding cushion, though. The animal's death doesn't cure the human's ontological sickness.
No, it doesn't.
It just satisfies the legal penalty temporarily.
Oh,
It manages the symptoms of the virus.
Exactly, it's symptom management. And the text points out that the prophets later expand this understanding of death beyond just biology and sacrifice. They apply it to the nation as a whole. When Israel repeatedly violates the covenant and ultimately suffers national collapse, the Babylonian exile, the prophets describe that exile as a form of death.
Because they are severed from the promised land and the temple, which is where God's presence resides.
Right.
And if separation from God's presence is the definition of spiritual death, then exile is basically national death.
Yes. And this is where the author brings up the haunting vision of Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones.
Such a wild image.
Ezekiel sees a valley filled with the dried-out, scattered bones of a massive army. God asks him, can these bones live?
And it's a graphic metaphor for Israel's ontological reality.
Exactly. They aren't just a defeated nation needing a better military strategy or a new king. They are a graveyard.
Right.
They need the very breath of God, the Spirit, to reconstruct them and breathe life back into their corpses. It highlights the absolute necessity of a resurrection-like restoration.
But the overarching point the author makes about this entire Old Testament era, from Noah all the way to the prophets, is that all of these interventions were provisional.
That is the critical word right there.
Right.
Provisional.
Right.
God rescues them from floods, from famine, from slavery in Egypt, from invading empires. He accepts the blood of bulls and goats, but none of these acts actually abolish death itself.
No.
Death still reigns supreme over every patriarch, every king, and every prophet.
They were holding actions, they were mitigating the bleeding while waiting for the true king, the true champion, to step onto the battlefield. Which brings us to the ultimate confrontation. The transition from the symptom management of the Old Testament to the definitive cure in the New Testament.
And this definitive cure wasn't a backup plan either. It was promised all the way back in the aftermath of the garden.
Right.
The text traces the lineage of this hope back to Genesis 3.15. Theologians often call this the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. God tells the serpent that he will put enmity between the serpent and the woman, and between the serpent's offspring and hers. The promise is that the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head.
But the verse also includes a stark warning, right? While the seed of the woman crushes the head, the serpent will strike his heel.
Yes.
The victory will require a wounding. It will require conflict.
Yes. And the New Testament explicitly declares that the death which entered the world through the first man, Adam, is fundamentally conquered through the second man, Christ.
The author leans heavily on the structural parallel the Apostle Paul builds in Romans chapter 5 here.
He does.
I want to spend some time on this second Adam concept because I think it's where a lot of modern readers get lost in the weeds of theological jargon.
It can be dense.
Extremely. How does one guy dying on a Roman cross 2,000 years ago actually alter my spiritual DNA today? What is the legal or ontological mechanism the author is proposing here?
The mechanism is called covenantal representation, or federal headship.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how a political ambassador works. If the ambassador of a country signs a treaty or declares a war, the entire nation they represent is bound by that action, even if the citizens weren't in the room.
Right.
In biblical theology, humanity isn't just a collection of disconnected individuals. We are a corporate body standing behind a representative head.
So Adam was the first ambassador.
Exactly. Adam was the covenant head of the human race. When he rebelled, he signed a treaty with death, and the entire human race inherited the consequences of that treaty.
Condemnation and mortality.
Right. We are all born in Adam. The mechanism of salvation, then, requires a new ambassador. Christ steps in as the second Adam.
Okay, I guess.
He lives the life of perfect obedience that the first Adam failed to live,
Mm-hmm.
and through his obedience, he generates a new humanity.
Mm-hmm.
If you are united to Christ by faith, his righteous record is legally transferred to you, just as Adam's broken record was inherited by you.
So in Adam, death reigns. In Christ, grace reigns. And we see Jesus actively demonstrating this authority during his earthly ministry.
We absolutely do.
The text points out that Jesus doesn't just walk around giving philosophical lectures on how to cope with mortality. He heals diseases, which are the precursors to death.
Mm-hmm.
He casts out demons, pushing back the dark spiritual forces, and most dramatically, he literally raises the dead.
The author highlights the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11 as the pivotal demonstration of this. Jesus stands at the tomb of his friend who has been dead for 4 days.
4 days.
Yeah. And the text notes that Jesus weeps. He doesn't dismiss the agonizing tragedy of death. He feels the weight of the cosmic rupture.
Right.
But then he makes a staggering ontological claim. He says, I am the resurrection and the life.
Notice he doesn't say, I can cause a resurrection. He says, I am the resurrection.
Precisely. He is claiming to be the very source of life that was severed in the garden.
Wow.
And then he commands Lazarus to come out, and the dead man walks. He demonstrates that in him, eternal life isn't just some faraway future state of being. It is a present participation in God's life right now.
But raising Lazarus was just a temporary reprieve.
Yeah. He had to die again.
Exactly. Lazarus eventually died again. To truly defeat the enemy, to break the virus permanently, Jesus couldn't just fight it from the outside. He had to face it head on. Which brings us to the cross.
The cross is the climax of the cosmic conflict. And we have to be clear on the mechanism here.
Right.
Jesus dies not as a victim of random Roman political violence, and as the ultimate sin-bearing lamb. He takes the penal aspect of death, the judicial curse we discussed earlier, fully upon himself.
You know, the way I love to visualize what the author is describing here is through the analogy of a Trojan horse.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, Jesus didn't defeat death like a general sieging a castle from the outside. He allowed himself to be swallowed by it. He went into the grave. Death took him in, thinking it had finally conquered the author of life. It consumed him, only to realize too late that it had swallowed the one thing that could tear it apart from the inside out.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate the mechanism. By dying, a sinless man entered the domain of death. But because he had no sin, death had no legal claim on him, the digestive system of death couldn't hold him.
Wow.
And this aligns perfectly with the author's reference to Hebrews 2.14 up to 15. This is honestly one of the most profound, psychologically piercing statements in the New Testament.
What does it say?
It says that through death, Jesus destroyed the one who has the power of death, the devil, and delivered all those who, through fear of death, were subject to lifelong slavery.
Lifelong slavery through the fear of death. Man, that hits so close to home.
It really does.
If you analyze human behavior, so much of our anxiety, our frantic empire building, our obsession with legacy, and our desperate pursuit of youth and beauty, it is driven by this subconscious humming terror that we are running out of time.
Right.
And that at the end, we just disappear into the void. It's a slavery to the clock.
And the author's point is that Christ liberates humanity from that specific paralyzing slavery. By entering death and breaking it from the inside, he removes its ultimate sting.
This leads directly to the resurrection. The author relies heavily on 1 Corinthians 15 here.
Okay.
The text is utterly decisive. Death is called the last enemy.
And what's crucial is that Christ doesn't just domesticate death. He doesn't just make it a slightly more comfortable transition or offer us better coping mechanisms. He destroys it.
The author emphasizes that Christian consolation is built entirely on victory, not on denial or sentimental platitudes.
Right.
When a believer dies, the biblical response isn't just to shrug and say, well, they are in a better place now. It was their time.
No.
The gospel declares that death itself is doomed. The resurrection of Jesus is the divine historical verdict that the cosmic rupture has been overcome. The tomb, as Velazquez beautifully puts it, becomes a defeated fortress. It's a prison with the doors blown off the hinges.
Okay, the fortress is defeated, the prison doors are blown off. The virus has a cure. Yet. If we look out the window right now, we still live in a world of hospitals, hospices, and graveyards.
We do. We still get sick. We still age. We still bury the people we love. If the victory was decisive on Easter morning 2,000 years ago, why are we still experiencing the horrific casualties of death today?
And that brings us to the profound theological tension of the present day, what theologians call the already but not yet.
Okay.
This is the massive paradox that the church currently lives in. Death has been decisively defeated in the cross and resurrection of Christ. That is the already. Yet believers still undergo physical death, and creation still groans under decay. That is the not yet.
I think the best way to understand this mechanism is like receiving the antidote to a fatal venom.
Go on.
Imagine you've been bitten by a highly venomous snake.
Yeah.
The venom is coursing through your veins, and you are hours away from dying.
Yeah.
A doctor injects you with the perfect infallible antidote.
Okay.
The exact second that antidote enters your bloodstream, the venom's power to kill you is fundamentally broken. You are saved. That is the already. But you aren't going to instantly feel fine. You're still going to sweat. You're still going to shiver. You might be sick for days as your body flushes the neutralized venom out of your system. That suffering is the not yet. The venom is defeated, but its lingering effects still have to be processed.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy for the eschatological tension the author is describing.
Yeah.
The resurrection power of Christ has begun its work in the world. The ultimate outcome is guaranteed. But the final cosmic bodily resurrection of all believers is still in the future. We are living in the flush-out period.
Which means we are forced to proclaim life while standing at the edge of open graves.
It does.
That is an immensely heavy paradox to carry. How does the author suggest a believer actually process that tension?
The text points to the Apostle Paul's mindset in Philippians 1:21, where he writes, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain."
Now, to a modern secular ear, saying to die is gain sounds almost pathological.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like a death wish, or some sort of stoic detachment where you just check out of reality and stop caring about being alive.
The author is careful to clarify that this is not a morbid death wish. He calls it Christ-centered realism.
Christ-centered realism.
Yeah, death is not a good thing in itself. It is still the enemy. But for the believer, death has been transformed into a threshold.
Right.
It is gained specifically and exclusively because physical death brings the believer into the immediate conscious presence of the Lord. They leave the physical body for a time, but they are with Christ, awaiting the final bodily resurrection at the end of the age.
So it radically alters the mechanics of how we grieve.
It does.
The text references 1 Thessalonians 4, where Paul tells the early Christians that they will mourn, but they must not mourn as those who have no hope. It doesn't cancel out the pain of the rupture, but it injects hope into the center of it.
Exactly. However, while there is immense hope for the believer, the source material does not shy away from the darker side of this theological coin. It explicitly states that a biblical understanding of death does not permit any form of sentimental universalism.
Sentimental universalism, meaning the comforting popular idea that eventually, no matter what you believe or how you lived, everybody just goes to a generic, better place, and the universe just hugs it out in the end.
Correct. The text dives into the concept of the second death, detailed in Revelation chapter 20.
Okay.
The first death is physical, the separation of body and soul, but the second death is eschatological. For the unrepentant, those who remain in active rebellion against God and reject the cure of the second Adam, there is a final, judicial, and irreversible exclusion from the presence of God.
A permanent spiritual death. Now, I have to push back here because this is the concept modern people struggle with the most.
Without a doubt.
How does the author reconcile a God of infinite love with the concept of a final permanent judgment? It sounds unbearably harsh.
The author argues that this judgment is the moral necessity of God's holiness. Remember our definition from the beginning. God is life. He is the source of all goodness, light, and truth. If a human being spends their entire life saying to God, "I want autonomy, I reject your rule, I do not want you," God ultimately honors that choice.
He gives them what they want.
But to be separated from the source of life means you are left with non-life, means you are left with the void. The God of life cannot eternally commune with unrepentant evil without compromising his own nature.
So the cross isn't just a demonstration of love. It is a revelation of the severe reality of sin.
Yes.
To reject the rescue mission of the Son is to choose to remain under the domain of the enemy.
It is a sobering, terrifying reality that grounds the theology. But the author pivots beautifully from these cosmic realities into the deeply practical implications for the listener today.
Because it has to be practical.
Exactly. If you are listening to this right now, how does understanding this massive theology of death change how you operate on a random Tuesday afternoon?
Well, the text outlines several specific areas of practical application. Let's walk through them. First is daily living and humility. The author notes that embracing this theology humbles human pride. It reminds us of Ash Wednesday. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. It forces us to admit that our lives are not self-generated. We are dependent creatures.
Which naturally flows into the second application, leadership and ambition. The text mentions Psalm 90.1, where Moses prays, "Teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom."
Numbering our days destroys vanity. If you truly internalize that your time on earth is finite and that an eternal horizon is approaching, it completely shifts your priorities.
Absolutely.
You stop clinging to petty power dynamics. You stop building little corporate or social empires just to stroke your own ego. You start investing in things that actually outlast the grave.
Then the author addresses suffering and grief, which we touched on, but the compassion in the text here is really striking.
Yeah, it is.
It explicitly says that grief is not weakness. Tears are not a sign of unbelief. When Jesus stood at Lazarus' tomb, he knew he was going to raise him in 5 minutes, but he still wept. The cosmic rupture should break our hearts. Christian hope transfigures grief, but it does not demand we pretend the pain isn't real. You can weep honestly without despairing eternally.
And the fourth application completely reframes evangelism.
This one is key.
Right. If you view evangelism as pressure marketing for a religious social club, it feels awkward and offensive. But if you accept the premise that death is a real, creeping, ontological enemy that consumes everyone, then sharing the gospel isn't marketing.
No, not at all.
It is an urgent mercy. It's running into a burning building to tell people where the exit is.
And finally, the text brings up this incredible concept of defiance. The author argues that in a world ruled by death, every ordinary act of faithfulness, every act of love, forgiveness, and worship is an act of defiance against the reign of the enemy.
I love that so much. When you choose to forgive someone who wronged you instead of holding a bitter grudge, you are breaking the cycle of relational death. When you sit by the bed of someone who is sick and offer comfort, you are acting as an agent of life in a death-bound world. You are planting flags of the coming kingdom in enemy territory.
Now, despite how empowering that is, there is a very natural modern objection to all of this.
Let's hear it.
I can hear a listener thinking, okay, this theology is profound, but isn't spending a 60-minute deep dive focusing on death inherently morbid? Doesn't constantly reminding ourselves that we are dust keep us from actually enjoying the beautiful, simple things in the life we have right now?
It's the classic fear of becoming so heavenly minded that you are of no earthly good. It feels like focusing on the storm ruins the picnic.
But the author forcefully argues the exact opposite. A life or a church or a personal philosophy that actively ignores death eventually becomes incredibly thin.
How so?
It becomes purely therapeutic, shallow, and sentimental. It forces you to put a crushing amount of pressure on this current, fleeting life to deliver ultimate satisfaction, which it was never designed to do.
Right. If this 80-year span is all there is, then every missed opportunity is a tragedy. Every sign of aging is a crisis.
Exactly.
But if you face mortality biblically, it actually provides profound clarity. It frees you. You can enjoy a good meal, a beautiful sunset, or a deep friendship without turning those things into idols because you know they aren't ultimate.
Right, they point to something greater.
They are previews of the coming reality. Paradoxically, facing the reality of death gives weight, substance, and durability to our joy.
But because facing this reality is so weighty, human cultures have spent thousands of years inventing myths, philosophies, and platitudes to soften the blow of mortality.
We really have.
The source text dedicates a significant section to myth-busting these cultural comforts. We need to clear the fog of these misunderstandings before we look at the ultimate consummation of the story.
The author lists 6 specific common misunderstandings, and I want to weave through these because they completely upend the cultural narratives we hear at every funeral and read in every self-help book.
Let's do it.
The first misunderstanding is exactly where we started. The idea that death is natural and good.
We've addressed this heavily, but it really bears repeating. To call death natural softens the reality of the fall. It tries to negotiate a peace treaty with a terrorist. The biblical witness refuses to normalize the rupture.
Right. Misunderstanding number 2. The idea that spiritual death is just a metaphor, like you're just out of touch with your spiritual side, or you have bad karma, but you can meditate your way out of it.
The author corrects this by insisting that spiritual death is an objective state of alienation. It has real, devastating legal and ontological force.
It's not just a feeling.
No, it is the total inability to please God or reconcile with Him without divine outside intervention. It's not a metaphor for sadness, it's a state of spiritual rigor mortis.
Then there is misunderstanding 3, and this one is rampant even within the church. The myth that the ultimate goal of salvation is escaping the physical body so our souls can float around on clouds in an ethereal heaven.
This is deeply rooted in Greek philosophy, specifically Platonism, which viewed the physical world as inherently bad or lesser, and the spiritual world as pure.
Right.
But biblical theology is profoundly physical. God created the dirt, the trees, and human bodies and called them very good. His plan isn't to scrap the physical universe. His plan is to redeem and resurrect it. The ultimate hope is a bodily resurrection in a renewed, tangible cosmos.
I really want to zero in on misunderstanding number 4, because modern secular culture is absolutely obsessed with this idea.
Oh, definitely.
It's the myth that death itself is redemptive. You hear this all the time. Death gives life meaning. The argument is that because time is short, death acts as this noble, neutral teacher that motivates us to live authentically and cherish the moment.
And the author aggressively tears down that romanticism. Death does not save anyone. Death is an enemy. It is a destroyer.
It teaches nothing.
It teaches nothing redemptive in and of itself. If a person finds clarity in the face of death, it is only because God, in His grace, uses the terror of the enemy to awaken them and point them to Christ.
Right.
But death itself deserves no credit. Only the author of life can take the violent rupture of death and repurpose it for good.
Misunderstanding 5 is the idea that the fear of death is purely psychological, a phobia, something you can just logic or therapy your way out of if you achieve enough mindfulness.
The text argues the fear of death is a feature, not a bug, of fallen humanity. It touches the conscience. It is an innate awareness of impending judgment and eternal destiny. It is a spiritual slavery, not just a chemical imbalance or an emotional quirk.
And finally, misunderstanding 6. The belief that judgment and mercy are mutually exclusive. The cultural idea that a loving God could never judge or a judging God could never be loving.
And the biblical response, as the author lays out, is that perfect justice and perfect mercy intersect violently and beautifully at the cross.
Right.
To minimize God's judgment is to completely flatten His grace. If there is no wrath against sin and no real penalty of death, then what exactly did Jesus save us from?
Nothing, really.
Exactly. Mercy loses its magnitude if there is no genuine peril.
Which clears away all the philosophical fog and points us directly to the final horizon, the end of the biblical narrative. The text moves past the tension of the already but not yet and looks toward the ultimate consummation, the new creation.
We see this depicted in the sweeping visions of 1 Corinthians 15 and Revelation 21 and 22. The narrative arc completes itself. Christ reigns until every single enemy is subdued under His feet.
And Paul explicitly says, the last enemy to be destroyed is death.
Yes. In the vision of the new creation in Revelation, the text declares, death shall be no more. Not just that it will be less painful or better understood, it will be eradicated.
I love how visceral and grounded the imagery of the New Jerusalem is in these final chapters. Again, it is not humans abandoning a ruined earth to fly away to a distant heaven.
No.
The imagery in Revelation is the heavenly city descending to the earth. The dwelling place of God is finally permanently stationed with man. The ground that was cursed with thorns and thistles back in Genesis 3 is fundamentally healed. The curse is broken.
The whole person, body and soul, and the entire cosmos are redeemed. And the most beautiful full circle moment occurs here.
With the tree.
Yes. The tree of life, which was barred in Genesis 3 by the cherubim and the flaming sword to prevent eternal decay, reappears in the center of the city.
Wow.
But the sword is gone. The tree is unbarred. Its leaves are for the healing of the nations, and humanity is invited to eat freely.
The ultimate firewall has been removed because the virus has been eradicated from the system. And the author makes a point to say that eternity is not endless boredom. It's not sitting on a cloud strumming a harp for 10 billion years.
Right.
The text calls it glorified participation in divine life.
Because the relational rupture has been completely healed. Death is abolished because separation from God is completely abolished.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity is finally restored to the unhindered flow of life from the Creator, operating exactly as the blueprint originally intended, but now with the unbreakable security of the second Adam's victory.
Let's take a deep breath and just recap the sheer scale of the journey we've gone on today. We started by looking at the original blueprint humanity, designed for contingent, derived life in unhindered communion with God.
Great.
We examined the tragic cosmic rupture in Eden, where the epistemological rebellion brought the virus of both spiritual and physical death into human ontology. We traced how God managed those symptoms through the holding pattern of the Old Testament covenants, utilizing the visceral alarm system of animal sacrifice to teach the severity of substitution.
Then we witness the ultimate confrontation, the true champion entering the fray, the Trojan horse victory of the cross, where Christ absorbs the penal curse of death and destroys the authority of the grave from the inside out, proving it with an empty tomb.
We explored the messy, painful tension of living in the already but not yet, carrying the hope of the antidote while still experiencing the symptoms of the venom. And finally, we looked ahead to the final horizon, the unbarred tree of life in a physically renewed cosmos where death is permanently eradicated.
So the ultimate question is, what is the takeaway for you, the listener, living right now in the tension of a Tuesday afternoon?
Right.
The author concludes that the believer is invited to live with a paradoxical freedom. We acknowledge the reality of our current state. We are dust. But because we are united to the resurrected Christ, dust is no longer our final identity. The grave is just a doorway, not a destination.
And realizing that changes the mechanics of how you live today. The text argues that in light of this cosmic victory, every ordinary act of faithfulness, eating a meal with gratitude, working with integrity, forgiving someone who hurt you, comforting a grieving friend, these are not just nice moral gestures.
No, they're actual localized acts of defiance against the reign of death.
They are declarations that the enemy does not own the future.
I love that.
So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over today, something that builds on everything we've discussed. If human beings were originally designed with the hardware to be immortal, plugged into an eternal power source, how much of our current psychological distress, our midlife crises, our frantic anxiety is actually just the symptom of an eternal soul crammed into decaying hardware?
Oh, that's good.
What if your deep dissatisfaction with the fleeting nature of time isn't a sign that you are broken, but a sign that you were built for a world where the clock never runs out?
That is a profound perspective. It suggests that our longing for permanence is the echo of Eden still reverberating in our bones.
It really is. Thank you for joining us for this incredibly massive deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives around you, keep exploring the sources, and remember, the next time you are tempted to view mortality as just a natural, unavoidable biological endpoint, consider that maybe, just maybe, it is an intruder whose days are numbered.
The fortress is defeated. The gates are open.
Until next time.